All right, guys, welcome to Firm and Final. This is really exciting for me. So we're doing a podcast in person, and I'm joined by some guests today in person. So we got Andrew Trupiano, got Davey, and we got James Donnelly. And this is really cool. So we're closing up season 2 of the podcast. You guys were all guests on the podcast this year, and so thanks for doing that. And as we move into season 3, I thought it would be really cool to move to a format where we do like a group session, like 3 to 4 people, and talk about different topics. And so that's what we're going to do today. And just to kind of give everybody the background, so we all work in the self-insured industry, fully insured, stop loss. And so in the group healthcare space, right, we have members that utilize care. We have employers that provide that coverage to their employees and members. And so because of that, employers are buying employer stop loss coverage, and they typically need help from a broker to get that coverage. And then stop loss carriers are buying reinsurance, and they typically go to a reinsurance intermediary to get that coverage. And we basically have, between the 4 of us, we have all of that within the team here today. And so as we get started, I thought maybe we can just go over quick backgrounds on everybody. So Andrew, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell everybody where you work today and what part of the industry you work in?
Sure, thanks. So Andrew Trupiano, I am the CEO and founder of ATS Underwriting. We are a full service MGU specializing in medical stop loss. Awesome.
And so how long have you been doing that? How long have you been an MGU that's writing stop loss coverage?
So ATS started in 2020. Prior to that, I was running underwriting at a large direct carrier.
Okay.
And prior to that, I got my career started in the MGU platform.
So Dan, let's move to you and tell everybody your background.
Yeah, sure. So Dan Davey, Alliant Insurance Services. I lead the national stop loss practice, so I'm on the broker side. So charged with partnerships and product development and distribution within, the broker space with our self-funded client base.
Yeah. And so prior to going to Alliant, where were you?
Yeah, I was at another large firm for 18 plus years doing something similar, general benefits consulting, but then with a focus on stop loss pretty much since the beginning. Yep.
And James, how about you?
Yeah, and first, thanks for having me, Mehb. This is really cool.
Yeah.
I grew up watching like the simulcast of Mike and the Mad Dog. And, so if I start arguing Boston sports with Andrew here, you know why.
That's right.
So I'm a reinsurance broker. I work at Lockton Re, coming up on about 2.5 years there. So everything you kind of described, we're the intermediary that helps insurance and stop loss carriers kind of purchase some type of coverage around their block of business.
Yeah. And so prior to being at Lockton Re, where were you?
Yeah, so I've been at a couple different reinsurance broker shops. I've been in the reinsurance intermediary role, I think coming up on 7 years now. Spent my entire career in the self-funded space. I actually was an underwriter at an MGU to start the career. Through that, I kind of learned that I liked the sales and business development angle, and kind of was a natural progression into the reinsurance space.
Have you guys ever thought about changing teams and working on a different part of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of the general agent format.
Yeah.
I think there's a big demand out there in having the ability to access several capacity providers has always intrigued me a bit. And also, the reinsurance brokerage side, I call folks like James mountain movers.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can get a lot done, and something that seems kind of insurmountable. It's a very interesting concept to me.
Sure. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of other people, I kind of fell into this industry, didn't go to school hoping to be a stop loss broker. But no, I mean, to be honest, I really like where I'm at. I enjoy the partnerships, both internally, externally, client facing. So I like the different roles and the different entities I'm interacting with. So I don't know, I never say never on anything, but I'm in a pretty good spot right now, I feel.
Okay. James?
Yeah, mountain mover might be a little bit of a stretch. Anthill mover, maybe. But I appreciate the sentiment. Look, I mean, play the grass is always greener game, every once in a while, especially, this is work at the end of the day. So there's challenges associated with all of this. But I really like the role I'm in. I kind of get to work with all different types of clients, kind of agnostic of business plans, and there's always a deal that can be done. And you interact with some smart people, and like Dan said, you get a lot of kind of the partnership people element in the role I'm in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm sticking in the insurance industry, and same deal, I wasn't in crayon in kindergarten writing, this is what I wanted to be doing for a living. But I really like kind of the role and where I'm at within the self-funded industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so today is August 1st. We're kind of entering the busy period for employer stop loss coverage. And that's because most of those policies in our industry, like 60 to 65% are written on January 1. And the work for that basically gets done starting now. And so can you guys just describe to me what busy season is like for you where you guys are? And Dan, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, busy season is rapid fire, right? It is opportunities, but also challenges coming from all different directions in terms of placements and claims and, issues that need to be resolved. So it's really get stuff done time of year where it's okay, what's up next? You can't really predict what the day's going to look like or what you're going to be dealing with, and you get a phone call here and an email there, and it's nonstop. But it's hesitate to use the word exciting, but it is. I mean, it's what this industry is, the 1/1 season. So
Sure.
if you can't get up for it and get the energy going, then you should be doing something else probably.
Yeah. Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, it's logistics.
Yeah.
Really, over the next 3 months. We're in our seat where we're fielding these rapid fire kind of RFPs and opportunities. We're talking about going from seeing maybe 300 to 400% increase on monthly submissions in this extremely narrow window in 3 months where you have to get a lot done. So where there's so much happening, it's just making sure that the team is ready, the trenches are dug, which we like to call it, to operate as efficiently as possible. So
Sure.
nothing slips through the cracks.
How do you keep it together? Like, this has got to be like a high anxiety time if you're on like the side that's releasing the RFPs and you're on the side that's getting the RFPs.
Mm-hmm. Keep it together. I think that's a good way to put it. That's what we're trying to do for 3 months, right?
Yeah.
But I think, you keep it together by being prepared leading up to it. Like, what did we do in June and July to prepare for August through October? Well, it's a source scrub, right? Make sure that the opportunities coming in are from viable producers, right? Can we trim anything, right? We're just not closing on to help whittle down that funnel a little bit, and then also just be prepared, make sure the underwriters understand kind of have a decent projection of what's coming in, and then all of the other hands that are going to touch that one account. This is the time in July that you make sure everybody kind of, the expectations are clear and everything's.
Sure. And I remember on the brokerage side, Dan, we would get new people starting every time in the summer.
Yeah.
And we would throw them into stop loss.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So what's like a new kid going through when they're like put on your team and having to work the RFP process with the carriers?
I mean, a lot of that, back to the logistics comment, is just keeping track of where everything is and, what you owe and to who and when. The other thing that's challenging is, on the broker side, both internally and with clients, you're delivering a lot of bad news. They don't think they pay not enough, right? So you give them a renewal increase of any kind, and
they're mad.
Yeah, they're not happy about it. So, it's just managing those expectations leading up to the delivery of whether it's a renewal or marketing results is a huge challenge. And I think sometimes for people younger in the industry, trying to keep track of everything, and then it's like they feel like they did their job because they put together the results in a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint, whatever it might be, and they deliver it.
Yeah.
And they don't really realize the kind of reaction they're going to get back. And sometimes that can, catch them a little off guard.
Sure. James, is it a similar busy season in the reinsurance space?
Yeah, 1/1's definitely a big kind of milestone of the year for a lot of our clients. For me personally, I'm kind of coming up on the tail end of my busy season. So a lot of the stop loss carriers I work with on the reinsurance side, they like to have their reinsurance done in advance of everything that these guys are talking about, probably because of everything these guys are talking
Yeah,
about.
it's a busy time. They don't want to be double dipping with the type of work that they got to do.
Exactly, man. They've got so much other stuff on their plate that if they could get the reinsurance done in advance of that, I mean, it also there's some financial incentive to that too, because what you pay for reinsurance does dovetail into how you underwrite and
Sure.
how things get kind of rated up. So if you have that number, you've got it set. It gives you more clarity going in the busy season, and you're not kind of scrambling. And again, resource constraint and all that preparation is, that's definitely an issue. So
Sure.
if you can knock out this task, you get an effective date in the summer, you've got your treaty in place, it makes those 3 months a lot easier for our clients.
Sure. So preparation is key. That's what I heard. But how do you measure success? When you come out of a busy season, what do you look back on, Andrew, and say, that was a really good busy season for us?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, did we write some business?
Yeah.
Right? Did we retain what we needed to retain? Did we clean the book up to the standard that we need to? But also, were we operating efficiently? Were we missing any turnaround times, or, because we're coordinating a lot of things, especially when a case kicks into going into firm, right? Then you need to bring in clinical and things like that. How successful and efficient were we in making sure all of those things happened in a timely manner and met the expectations of the people on the receiving end? So we have a pretty good post evaluation process to make sure, and if there's anything that needs to change, we'll take the rest of the Q1 and Q2 of the following year to make sure that happens.
Okay. Dan, how about you? What's a successful busy season look like?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's adding value for our clients, right? And getting them what they're looking for, and in a lot of situations, what they deserve. And at the same time, we want to be making those placements with partners, carrier partners that we feel comfortable with, that we know will do right both by us and our clients. So at the end of the day, I mean, the client is the focal point for us. If they're happy and we've, successfully, satisfied their goals, then we did our job.
Sure.
And that can be, any leverage in the marketplace, and there's just a lot of work involved.
Sure. James, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I really liked adding value to clients. I think that's kind of the whole point of the brokerage community, right? Like, I view a reinsurance broker, we're a luxury item. I mean, most of our clients are capable of probably getting reinsurance done on their own. So for me to earn my brokerage, we have to do a good job and do something that they couldn't do. So, I mean, success to us, first and foremost, it's getting the deal done and getting it done on acceptable terms. We get paid on a success-based model. So if something doesn't get done, we don't get paid, and we wasted a lot of time and a lot of effort. But I almost think reinsurance too, it's an interesting balancing act, because obviously part of it, like, the client's looking for you to get them the best deal and drive their reinsurance spend as low as possible. But it's a long-term play with reinsurance, especially where, again, you're buying this cover for kind of catastrophic, crazy scenarios that you might not have even thought of yet. So striking a balance where the client is satisfied, but also the reinsurer's happy.
Yeah.
And if you get into a sticky situation, that it is a strong relationship and both parties have felt like this is a partnership from the beginning, I mean, that's how you make it through some of these tough times without getting lawyers and all that other crazy stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot
involved.
of bad news in our
I was
industry,
going to say,
right?
sticky situations are a common occurrence this time of year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's almost like bad situations that need to get resolved, and that's when the partnership comes into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get past busy season, and you get to January. 2 questions. How do you celebrate that past season, and what do you do in the off season? Andrew, let's start with you.
Oh, you celebrate. I mean, we try to get the whole crew together around December-ish to physically celebrate, which is nice. But I think, all of the underwriters and the ops folks take just a collective sigh of relief. We did it. The next couple quarters, for me, it's business planning, right? We'll also meet with our carriers. When it's not, such a hectic time of year, we can spend some time together, understand the state of the book and things like that. What's the plan moving forward? And is there any, need for staffing now? Looking back, how did we do 1-1? What needs to happen? Are we growing? And where do we need to, allocate the correct capital and things like that? So a lot of business planning. It doesn't technically end for me. It's just a different kind of busy, I think.
Sure. Dan?
I don't know if celebrate's the right word. I think there's some relief involved.
Yeah. There used to be celebrate, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember when we were working together, it felt like January was a time when like the leaders would get together and kind of take that sigh of relief, but then we'd bring the teams together and celebrate, spend some time together like in March, April.
I think that's hard, and it's harder on our side too. I mean, there's not as much of a downtime as there used to be. At least that's how I feel. I mean, you know, there's a big chunk of January, February where you're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, you know, count things, where did things move, what didn't, what did, who's happy, who's not.
Sure.
And then that rolls right into stewardship. And, you know, we have a lot of great partners and we have to hold up our end of the bargain on that. And part of that is, you know, sitting around the table, you know, reviewing results from 1/1 in the past 12 months and what could we have done collectively better, what went well, what didn't. So, I mean, there's not a whole, like I said, there's an exhale and some relief in early January, but it picks up pretty quick.
Sure. James?
Yeah, I like to sneak in a little celebrating.
Yeah.
You know, and especially like you work with some good clients and good people. It's fun to get together and, you know, celebrate some of the work and accomplishments you guys made. But yeah, I mean, it does feel like you get those first 2 weeks of January, right? You get to take a little bit of sigh of relief. Feels like the whole industry as a collective might just be like, okay, we could take a little bit of a pause here.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like January 15th or whatever that Monday is, that's when everyone kind of goes back in the work mode. And especially our carriers too, like that's when you start planning for the year, mapping stuff out, triaging what happened during the year, how do you do better? And that's when we start kind of engaging with everybody. So yeah, I mean, there really is, you know, there's no real downtime if you're doing this thing right. But that's kind
when
of
I think of like your space, I think of like the intermediaries as deal makers and they're looking for like opportunities. So is that something like you're constantly sourcing for? Is there like, you know, in like the stop loss brokerage space, you know, you're the off season, you're looking for new clients, obviously. But in your space, it feels like that's happening all the time.
Constantly, man. And that's what's great about it too. Cause I mean, there's some kind of canned reinsurance products, but there's no playbook to it. And you're not just selling one thing. I mean, you really are kind of selling solutions and it's almost like a consultancy role too. So if I'm not talking to the likes of you guys and trying to figure out what the problems are, I mean, even if it's not a big money-making opportunity, like that's the role, is getting your hands dirty and trying to like get stuff done for people when it might not be 100% worth your time from a financial standpoint.
Sure.
But this is the long game, what we're doing. So doing that kind of gritty work and working with people is how you make a name for yourself and actually, you know, win some of the bigger reinsurance accounts in the space.
Go. All right, so let's get a little bit more controversial now, right?
All right.
We're in a marketplace where stop loss rates are going up every year by leverage trend. Reinsurance rates are going up every year by leverage trend. You know, you mentioned that the clients get pissed off. I mean, unfortunately, we're not selling TVs, and these go down in price every single year, right? Is this product sustainable at the rate that it's increasing for employers? Is this product cost sustainable?
I'll put it has to be. Right? I mean, the give and take, we have to find the middle ground and continue to find it because, I mean, stop loss is the backbone of the self-insured industry, right? So without stop loss, there is no self-insurance at the end of the day for 95% of self-insured clients. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lack of things going on in this industry, frequency and severity, right? But, like, we have to find a path forward collectively amongst ourselves and everybody sitting at this table in the various roles because otherwise we got probably bigger problems to worry about.
Yeah, and I think collectively is kind of the key there too, right? Because, you know, there's no shortage of bad faith actors in this space too, and people that, you know, and those are the people that make all our lives harder. But yeah, I mean, I think there's enough good here that, you know, it's worth trying to fix and continue to build on. But I mean, it's like anything. I mean, there's definitely room for improvement. And it seems like there's no shortage of capacity. I mean, on the carrier side and the reinsurer side. So I think from whoever's, you know, holding the purse strings and views this as a business, you know, I think there's opportunity there. So it's not going away. Doesn't mean there's not stuff that can be fixed, but
explain what that means, that there's a lot of capacity. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think capacity is just willingness to do this business and take on this financial liability and build a business around this product and this industry. And again, I'm by no means an expert, but from the reinsurance side, I mean, it's a pretty soft market right now, at least on the excess side. And for a while now, I think, most carriers find themselves in competitive situations where, the initial quote that they put out, it's probably coming down somewhere between 10 to 15% to actually win that business.
Yeah.
The quota share side's a little bit different. That takes a little more stomach and unique underwritingness, and there's not as many markets playing in that space. So I think that's probably a little bit more stressed and harder to get stuff done in, but on the excess side, I mean, we're seeing new entrants. We're seeing kind of the legacy folks still being aggressive, not only holding on to their business, but winning new business. So, I mean, I think the community views this product in this space as a growth area.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the retail stop loss side, it's been a soft market for a while now, right?
Yeah.
And I think despite all these headwinds, it remains really competitive. And, especially on the carrier side, and obviously you can talk more to it, but I mean, everybody tries to talk a hard market into existence, but it just hasn't occurred yet.
Yeah.
And I think by all accounts, most people feel like it should have, or it at least should going forward, but that doesn't mean it will, right? Especially when, again, you have some capacity and now you're talking probably pushing a $40 billion market, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. So, I mean, there's opportunities there for people to take on risk at a reduced price for top line. So if that continues, and you don't need everybody operating that way, but you have one or two in a given 1-1 cycle, and that
they drive it for everybody else.
Prevents the whole market from hardening.
Yeah. Andrew, what do you think?
No, that's not ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough for you.
It's a buyer's market for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like you talk about all of the new capacity coming in, that's good, but on the other side of that coin, in what style is it coming in, right?
Yeah.
Is it coming in for long-term success and building stable rates, or is it coming in with other, buy some business as much as we can immediately? And that's kind of like what you're referring to, Dan. You have every year, there's a couple folks out there that are clearly in that mindset, and what that does is it just depresses the overall rates.
Yeah.
And you can't get those renewal. Right? You led this off with can we keep doing leverage trend increases? If an account's running well, you're not going to renew it at a leverage trend.
That's
increase.
right. There's no chance.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so, we're not here to find solutions, just to talk about it, but I hope, something changes.
Yeah.
I don't think it will harden anytime soon, though.
Yeah, I think like you said, carriers talk a hard market into existence. So I look at NAIC results, right? And if you go back, call it like 15, 20 years ago, the carrier landscape, it used to run, the loss ratios used to run in the 60s. You look at the most recent loss ratios, it's running closer to the low 80s. And from that point, when you pay premium tax, you pay broker commissions, you pay various other expenses, and then you got to pay your own expenses and then give some type of margin to the risk taker. There's just not a lot of room there. And so that's why carriers say we're getting to a harder market, because the results suggest that everybody's going to start tightening up. Now, you could say that all day long,
Right.
but the reality is there's somebody out there that's typically willing to do it for less.
Well, and hand-to-hand combat, right? How that translates to an individual client and an individual placement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can all agree what we think the price should be for a certain piece of risk, but, right, I mean, actuaries don't make rates, markets make rates, right? So when you have a market that prices it irrationally,
Yeah.
From our standpoint, that's what our client's looking for, as long as it's with the right partner, with the right terms, where we don't have concerns around paying claims or renewals going forward. But that's a win in our world, and certainly where you guys sit, that's not a win, right?
Right.
Minus 20s are not things that you want to see in the market.
Right. Right.
I think, I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon either, because you look at, it probably goes all the way up to just kind of like the macro insurance and reinsurance environment. And A&H is a diversifier for a lot of these insurance companies, right?
Sure.
It's not property casualty. It's not tied to climate change and all that stuff going on. It's short tail risk. You write a bad case, you're technically off liability in 24 months. you write a bad life insurance case or a property case,
You're stuck with that for a long time.
Long time. So it's an attractive product to folks with a big kind of P&C or just big insurance operation. And
Sure.
the more stop loss grows, and even an 80% loss ratio, you got to figure margin on that is probably pretty good compared to some of this other stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe somebody will talk it into existence one day, but
Yeah.
I don't see it hardening
As
anytime
long
soon.
as there's constant infusion of new entrants, it will stay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that because, we have some new players in the employer stop loss space. Companies like Granular came out maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Prudential just announced that they're entering the stop loss market. But then at the same time, you have carriers that are leaving, right? So 4 or 5 years ago, Guardian left. Unum just recently announced that they're leaving. And then even on the reinsurance side, we've seen SCORE leave the A&H side. We've seen Munich leave that side. So starting with like the reinsurance capacity, James, what do you see happening with entrants coming in and out of the reinsurance space?
Yeah, so I mean, the reinsurance market's been probably more stable than the carrier side. And actually, we've seen probably the most movement within the last couple of years, where we've seen kind of 2 new entrants coming into the market. So, and again, I think it's kind of everything we've been talking about, right? I think even on the reinsurance side, this is viewed as a diversifier against a primarily P&C portfolio. So we've seen 2 new reinsurers come in. I know Munich was in the space at one point. SCORE was in the space. I mean, the problem with A&H is this is a talent-focused industry.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think there's anybody that, is going to Harvard Business School that's dying to get into the stop-loss space or the reinsurance side. So, except Dan here. But finding, I think, like the talent that could underwrite not only people but the business and make a buck off something in this environment is the challenge. So I think right now we're kind of on the upswing of capacity where there's new people. It's pretty soft. It's a robust marketplace. But, I mean, that boomerangs around a little bit.
Okay. Dan, what about you in your seat? You see a lot of carriers that come and go and want to do business with a company like Alliant. What's your take on carriers coming in and coming out?
I mean, it's all about scale in this business, right? So it's very difficult to start at zero and get to scale somewhat quickly, somewhat profitably.
Yeah.
Usually you can do one or the other, not both. So, yeah, I mean, in where we sit, I mean, I want to work with carriers that have been in the business. We don't have concerns about leaving the business. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, it's pretty fluid. But at the same time, you want known entities, right? We don't want, if you want to buy Swiss cheese coverage at a Swiss cheese rate, you can get it.
Yeah.
But you're creating more problems than you're solving. So that's, certainly something we try to avoid. And the best way to do that is to work with reputable entities.
Andrew, how about you? Because in your seat, you want to be able to underwrite on behalf of different carriers. Have you seen new carriers coming in looking for a program manager wanting to help them with distribution and underwriting?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. They all bring unique components to the table. The task of distributing that product is challenging to a certain degree because some folks like the idea that it's fresh blood, a new paper. Others, like Dan says, like, well, I mean, how do you pay claims and things like that? How do we evaluate a brand new carrier? So the other thing that it does is it dilutes the pipeline a little bit of kind of the underwriting pool, because a lot of these firms are starting up and they're plucking senior level folks to kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Where it's not like it's organically starting and bringing younger underwriters in and having a good training program too.
Why is that? Why don't we have like a training program anymore in this industry?
It goes directly back to what Dan just said, is that it's either you've got to go like 0 to 100.
Yeah.
There's no room for hanging out at 50 miles an hour. And that's the zone where you're training folks. But because that's such, it's top line focused to a certain degree, you've got to get people that can come in and have an immediate impact.
Yes.
Or you can find a way to manage that mid-level and have a good farm system.
Yeah, I think that's a place our industry is significantly lacking. There used to be a lot of companies that focused on development, but it just doesn't seem like anybody focuses on that today. And we're in a space where, people are retiring very quickly out of our space, and backfilling talent, I think, is going to be a massive problem in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, on the underwriting side, talent gets traded constantly, and carriers are always calling me and said, "Hey, do you know any good stop loss underwriters looking for something new?" I mean, to me, a stop loss, if you're an experienced stop loss underwriter, knows what they're doing, that job security is not an issue.
Yeah.
Because there is always, whether it's someone new or someone that's been around, there is always opportunities for an underwriting position.
Sure. So we talked about carriers that are coming in and coming out of the space. But Dan, let's shift the conversation into like the broker panels, because you're evaluating a set of carriers that you're presenting to your clients and saying, these are the ones that we've vetted and are the ones that you should do business with. Can you just give everybody a little bit of background on what it means to establish a broker panel?
Yeah, so we want to develop partnerships, right? We want to develop sizable books of business with, fixed number of carrier partners that we know well, that know us well. Because our clients look to us, when we recommend, hey, okay, we're going to take stop loss out to bid. These are the carriers we think you should go to. So they look to us for that expertise, right? Certainly there's financial ratings and other things, but they look to us to say, hey, if we buy coverage here, like, our claim's going to get paid, right? Is the contract solid? So those are things we try to vet on the front end. And, back to the 1-1 discussion, like, we don't have time to ask the same question 300 times, right? So to the extent we can establish rules of the road, hey, this is how we're going to do business together. And so someone asks me a question, I already know the answer. I don't have to go to you and get the answer. And then, the reps and the underwriters are getting asked the same thing over and over again. We have, responsibility on our side of that equation too. We ask a lot of the carriers, to pay claims, to price aggressively, and we have to deliver opportunities. We have to deliver those opportunities in the right way, in the right manner, with the right data. So it's a two-way street and a true partnership, but it's really about comfort, right? And this is a relationship business. You mentioned that earlier. So, sticky situations occur.
Yes.
Right? Favors are needed. And
extra contractual payments is the legal term for
yes.
that.
And so, you got to go hat in hand sometimes, and you want to call someone that you have a sizable book with, that you have, a track record working with them, and the other way too. So
it's like mutual leverage.
100%.
Yeah. So where we worked together before, it was a known fact that like we couldn't do business with MGUs, right? So Andrew, you got to have a take on that, because as an MGU, you're trying to do a lot of business and trying to get into some of these broker panels. So has that been a hard task for you to do?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little more challenging now because the MGU space has always been nimble. Mm-hmm. So, for the most part, we've been able to bob and weave around that. But with the consolidation, you're starting to see rapid formation of these COEs. But at the end of the day, Mehb, it's relationship, right? If we can just get a chance, usually that's enough to establish that trust immediately, because where the MGU differs from some of those larger carriers, it's responsiveness, transparency, direct contact usually with the decision makers. Mm-hmm. And like we talk about leverage and getting big decisions made with leverage. Well, you work with an MGU, you have another tier of leverage as well, because if it's a sticky claim situation, that MGU, if the relationship is good and worth it, can leverage their book with whatever carrier is on the risk as well. So I think there's a lot of positives in working with an MGU.
Sure.
Now, not all MGUs are created equal.
Yep. All right.
And as I spoke of before, new entrants coming into the market with some different intentions. They don't, have that type of leverage, nor will I think they be in it to establish the partnership so that, you can have mutually beneficial relationships there.
It seems like new MGUs are popping up all the time. That's got to be like a challenging space. Like I love the idea of entrepreneurship, right? But to go establish an MGU, it just seems it would be really hard to go get a paper and capacity. Am I wrong about that, James, or is that easier to get done today?
No, it's challenging now, and I think it's dovetails a lot off what Andrew said. Not all MGUs are created equal, and the top performing MGUs, which is probably 20% of the MGU market, are probably subsidizing the other 80% too. So I mean, there's getting papers probably. I'd say the easier task than securing a complete capacity tower, because a lot of carriers will be willing to write you a 20% line and put their paper out on the street because they get some risk-free money coming in. So they get some protection against loss ratio or some type of catastrophic development. It's filling out that primary risk or that big chunk of the risk and finding somebody who's really going to be invested in the results the MGU does. That's where it gets challenging, and that was that quota share market I was talking about. So that's where we get, we really earn our stripes there. If we could get that done for a program that's doing things right.
Sure.
That's the challenging part of that space.
So I want to go back to the topic of broker panels for a second. And, the broker panels, I think, drive really good value for employers. But I think they expose carriers to a lot of risk, right? There's terms like no new lasers with rate caps, even like multi-year agreements, things of that nature. Is that good if it's creating really good value for employers, but it's creating a lot of strain on carriers to the point where some carriers are exiting the space?
I mean, from our side, right, we're getting paid to add value for our clients. So where we sit, right, like that macro concern is not our concern.
Yeah.
Right. We need to protect a self-funded employer, right? So when it comes to rate caps and no new lasers, right, like we can't, 6 months from now, we can't have them in an unlimited liability situation because of something that has developed. So it's a must on our side, and our clients expect us to push the market, in terms of, the tightening and the contractual terms. So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely, obviously, we're sitting on two sides of the equation on this one, but that's the expectation the clients have for us.
But I think it's kind of similar to what we've been talking about too, right? Not all broker panels are created equal either. And, I think Alliant, I know, has a good reputation. We get to see kind of the results coming from certain distribution channels when we work with our clients. And you could tell, I mean, some broker panel or some some panel business are just, they don't run well. And then others do. And it probably is the people and the way it's set up and the intentions of the folks that are running those things that really drive the results.
Yeah, I think it's all about balance. Like Dan, from a perspective standpoint, like he said, their motivation is to do the best thing for the client. Obviously, the best thing for the client is to protect not just this renewal, but next year's with the rate caps and things like that, and get them the best rates they can. Obviously, I'm sure like the evaluation process is this carrier, based on our experience, going to just jack rates next year. That's why they have the panel. That's why they have the RFIs and things like that. But in general, like the motivation for the carriers and the COEs, they're always going to be different, right? So just finding that balance where you can kind of have a decent sized book that, you can squeak a profit out of and get it to a point where you can do those types of things to help them out is crucial.
So James, do you ever hear from reinsurers that are covering those carriers that have significant business through these panels? Like, I always found that the reinsurers don't always understand what like the retail brokers are doing. Does that create like a cause for concern for reinsurers to provide their XOL cover?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it's becoming more of an issue during the reinsurance underwriting process now. I mean, going through renewals, I feel like the last couple of years, there's been a lot more questions about like, okay, what percentage of your book is coming from this panel? What percent has no new lasers? What percent has rate caps? Because now you're starting to see the results of that.
Yeah.
And you need to price accordingly. So I think the smarter reinsurers out there are asking those questions and digging a little bit more and, peeling back the layers of the onion. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff is definitely kind of trending on our side of the space.
And I would say the other thing just on panels, of what our partners expect of us is a level playing field, right? So if we're holding you to a certain contractual obligation, the expectation is that everybody you're competing against, one is they are people you consider competitors, right? Because they are vetted, they are well known, they are established to a degree, but that we're not asking you to do something that we're not asking the rest of the market to do.
Sure. All right, so let's shift the focus a little bit. I'm curious from you guys, what's something about this industry that you absolutely love?
I mean, I like the people. I mean, I've been doing this 20 plus years now, and so the relationships that I've formed all around, right?
Yeah.
Broker, consultant, client,
Competitors.
carrier, competitors,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I enjoy that. I feel like I've made a lot of legitimate friends in this industry now
Yeah.
at this point. So, like, back to those sticky situations and making phone calls, like, I know it sounds cliche, but this is a relationship business, right? And there are scenarios that pop up that you couldn't dream up if you tried, right? When it comes to claims and timing and dollars. And so to be able to pick up the phone and have a candid conversation with someone you feel you know well,
Yeah.
and without trying to, spin it or angle it. I mean, that's what I value the most out of this. And, some of these partners, I've been working with for 20 years, I'm comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
And that makes my job a lot easier.
Good.
I second that totally. It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the folks we work with at ATS today were at my wedding, right? Some good friends have come out of this line of work, and I'm not sure if it's like that in every industry,
Yeah.
but I think you can get more out of the stop loss space if you are open to kind of having and fostering solid relationships.
Yeah.
From a work perspective and personally.
Sure.
And then also the fact that like every single day, I'm not exaggerating, brings something different
Yeah.
to the plate.
100%.
That's right.
And you've got to stay on your toes. It's hard to get bored in my role, and I'm sure everybody else's role at this table here.
I agree with that.
All right, well, I'll try to switch it up because I probably would have said people too. But
Yeah.
I think stop loss especially does a pretty good job of rewarding hard work. You meet the guys who are in real kind of high level executive type roles. They might not be moonlighting as a rocket scientist, but they work and
Yeah.
they get their hands dirty. And stop loss especially is a gritty industry. And if you're not going to do that work and you're not going to do it, I feel like the industry does a pretty good job of not elevating you.
Sure.
But I think it does a good job of rewarding people who do good work and work hard and can strike that balance between people too.
Yeah, I guess for me, the product is the product, right? It doesn't vary that much from carrier to carrier.
Yep.
But putting that to the side for a second, I think this space has a lot of room for creativity. And that's the thing that jazzes me up, that I feel like, there's different ways to approach the market. There's different ways to create value for employers and for carriers. There's room for like new product development. That to me is what jazzes me up about this space.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Is that
go for
allowed
it.
in this format?
Yeah.
So innovation in the insurance industry they don't go side by side, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the time. So from where you are, what are the barriers to that innovation, right? Is it regulatory? Is it distribution? Is
Yeah.
it finding partners that are willing to
It's
fight
a-
the fight with you?
That's a great question. So I would tell you, you need 4 things to be successful in a solution, right? You need the product, and that's like having a filing, or like having like the compliance backup to go create the filing. You need talent. So in our space, you need stop loss underwriters, clinicians. You need reinsurance underwriters, clinicians who understand how to assess risk. Then you need distribution. You need people on your team that can go sell, or you need partnerships that help you with like enterprise sales. And then the 4th thing you need is capital, right? In order to take on risk, you need to have money in the bank to do it. Any one of those things can be the limiting factor. What I've seen is like the biggest limiting factor is distribution.
Okay.
So you could have like the greatest product idea in the world. If you don't have a way to get that product out to the masses, it's going to fail. And I'll give you a really good example. Littered in our space today are the point solutions, right? And the points, there's so many of them out there. They're all struggling with distribution because they don't understand the self-insured space or the group health space. So every one of them, you talk about people hopping jobs in our industry.
Yeah.
In that space, you always find there's like a broker liaison or an employer liaison who is supposed to be like the expert in like in the space to distribute the product, but a lot of them are just not moving their product because they don't understand the space.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that too. And I agree with you. I think distribution's kind of probably the biggest barrier to innovation right
Yeah.
now. And we get approached by a lot of kind of startup companies and a lot of folks who probably didn't grow up around the insurance industry. And they have great ideas. They look great on paper. It's sleek. They probably wrap some cool tech around it. Like, it's awesome. But the biggest barrier to getting kind of a partnership deal like that done with an insurance carrier or capacity provider is the distribution. And it's such a unique animal, especially in the stop loss space, that if you don't have that nailed down and your plan isn't firm, and even if you have a plan, I mean, you could, like a veteran who's going to drop capacity and actually put coin behind this, they could sniff out if a distribution plan is not going to work in like 5 minutes. So I'm with you. It's a tough one because, innovation comes from kind of outside perspective and outsider ideas, but you also need that insurance knowledge to make something successful in our space.
Absolutely.
Do you think our industry suffers from inertia? I mean, we're not a young industry from a talent perspective. Do you think that's part of the problem?
I think it is part of the problem. I think the status quo is easy. It's not volatile. It drives earnings, and people like stability when you're talking about things like that. But I think there's a new crop of people that are coming up that are going to have to work for like the next 25 to 30 years to put food on the table for their families, and they're not willing to be as status quo.
Yeah.
Right. So what about an area where you're not so thrilled about this industry? What's like a really big pet peeve for you, or what's something that you're just sick and tired about in our industry? Andrew, let's start with you.
Well, we covered my primary point about the new entrants.
Yeah.
That really, it dilutes some of the underwriting integrity, I think, across the board.
Yeah.
That's a pet peeve. But yeah, I'll just stick with that.
Okay.
It gets me,
Sure.
especially on the MGU side.
All right.
We talk about new carriers coming in, but like you said, new MGU.
New MGU and new carrier, that combination
That's not ideal.
Maybe great for employers,
Yeah.
but it's not great for those of us that are trying to eke out an underwriting gain.
Correct.
Dan, how about you?
So I'll give you two.
Yeah.
One, on the product side, I think a lot of our problems, again, more on the retail stop loss side, can be directly tied to single year, policies. So we're doing this, $40 billion industry, right? 65% 1/1. We're doing that every year,
Yeah.
right? We're not in 2 or 3 year contracts, even one-sided, right? Where I'm more of the group life insurance space where, maybe they shop, maybe they don't. So we're forced to do this over and over again. I think it leads to a lot of people have very short-term goals. When a client is tied to an insurer for a single year, I think sometimes the opportunity to work together, is limited because, they view that carrier as possibly not being there in 6 months.
Sure.
So I think that's part of the challenge. The second one would be just data availability. I mean, there's nothing more annoying than asking for data from a payer and they say no. You ask again, they say no. You're going to get it, but I got to ask 4 or 5 times, right? And
Yeah.
in the meantime, a week's gone by. And then, not to get too far in the weeds, but then we got to do it all over again because we need another month of data.
Yeah.
So, that piece is, people still are, guarding that data. How and why, I'm not entirely sure, but that is super frustrating on the broker side.
Sure. James, how about you?
Yeah, I'll go with two. And I think it's kind of funny because, I think we're talking about like the best part of this industry is the people, but that's a double-edged sword because I also think the worst part of this industry can always be the people too. And I'm sitting here with 3 pretty successful guys, and I think that's because you guys have built a lot on relationships and you guys are passionate about what you do. And there's nothing worse than when you're working with somebody who doesn't share that with you or doesn't understand kind of the partnership and the macro environment that we've been talking about. So, the people in this industry are the best part. I think it could also be the worst part. And then,
Sure.
I mean, a little more zoned in. I think like private equity and outside investment is not a problem, but it can be a challenge in this industry.
That's the one I was going to
sometimes.
say. That's the one I was going to say. I also have 2. Private equity is one of them. I just think that's good and bad. It's that capacity is forcing a lot of change in our industry. But typically it's associated with higher margins and higher costs. And I don't think that's a good thing for anybody. But maybe it'll be something different. The other thing I was going to say is the rate of speed that this industry moves in, and the speed by which all of us move in. It's almost moving like too fast right now, and it's like you don't have enough time to breathe. You don't have enough time to think about like, what did I do last week? It's like somebody will ask me like, what were you doing last week? And I'm like, I literally cannot remember because it just feels like that was so long ago. So much has happened since that time.
Yeah, and it does feel like you blinked and it's August already, too.
That's right.
It's crazy.
That's right. Like more than half the year is over.
So we move fast, right? But the insurance industry is not known for necessarily efficiency, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's some technology platforms out there, but what percentage of RFPs that come through your guys' shops are via email and a zip file and like multiple that you have to go dissect and figure out what the hell someone just sent you?
A fair amount.
Yeah.
But obviously, with the advent of some of those platforms, it's helping a bit.
Yeah, I would say we've adopted some of those platforms, and we're working with some brokers who are exclusively using those platforms. And that's a double-edged sword. I think there's some efficiencies to be had when you're exchanging RFP and data. I think the downside to that, though, is we've all said this is a relationship business, and we've now added like a technology component in the middle that limits your ability to like have a face-to-face conversation with somebody. It's almost like now it's down to the rate. And we all know that like, the best rate is usually going to win. But like it really is limiting that relationship aspect of the business. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of salespeople right now.
Yeah. So we use one of those technology platforms, and the way I view it is, it should make the first 80% of that transaction easy. And then that relationship piece is getting it over the goal line, right? In the last 20. I just think as an industry, we have a lot of room to grow there. I mean, especially when we start talking about structured data. The fact that, again, not to speak for you guys, but if you get 10 submissions, RFPs, those files look 10 different ways, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes 20 different ways. You get last year's, this year's, that's where we have room in this industry to make our lives easier.
Yeah.
If we're all working off the same data coming in the same way, then all of a sudden that first 80%, I mean, it shrinks pretty quick, especially when you talk about running a manual rate, right?
Sure, absolutely. So this has been a great conversation. I'm going to close it up with like a big question to ask you guys. And the question is, I want you to make like a profound statement of something about our industry that if we look back, in 12 to 24 months, we'll look back at this time and say, you made a bold statement and something came to fruition, or just something that's going to be massively different in our industry. James, why don't we start with you?
I've got two. My first is I'm going to bet we see a major writer of stop-loss reinsurance exit the industry within the next couple of years. And again, the way I kind of see it, like, a lot of these companies are tied to P&C companies. And if I'm the CEO of a reinsurer, you're looking at this on a return of equity and cost of capital. And claims are rising. This looks like a better year and a better couple years for the property market. If underwriting gains on the A&H side do not improve, I could see a P&C guy looking at this division and being like, it's not worth it. And with that, I think there's going to be more of a push for deal syndication on the reinsurance side. So right now, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of the reinsurance deals that get done in the marketplace get done with one reinsurer. I think with the rising claims, cost of claims, the size of these claims, I think you're going to see more, multiple reinsurer structures. And it's been talked about. I think there's some of those kind of on the program and quota share side already. I think you're going to see more of a push for that on the excess side too.
Interesting. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know how profound it is, but I mean, the consolidation on the retail stop loss side. I mean, I think there just has to be, especially if there's some hardening that happens on the reinsurance side, frequency and severity continuing to climb at the rate that it is. I mean, some of the smaller carriers in the market I don't know how that is sustainable. So I would think there'd be some consolidation over the next few years. The other thing is just in terms of, I complained a little bit about data availability, but it's getting incrementally better. And I think as that occurs, I just think the value of a quote network, I think we may see that diminished in terms of stop loss underwriting. I mean, that's one of the big factors, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
On coming up with a manual rate. I think 5 years from now, it'll still be a factor, but not what it is today. I think it's going to be more around getting better at it, who manages those claims, and on the cost containment side, who does a better job, rather than, what's the book rate, for an MRI. I just don't see the value there in a few years.
Andrew?
So mine plays a bit off what you were talking about earlier with like what takes innovation. And I think two of the things you said, these agencies have it. So I think a retail brokerage agency will file for paper. It's out there, but we're throwing it. But they have distribution and capital. I talked about a little bit on our one-on-one episode where you have these platforms beginning to establish.
Yeah.
Where it's a captive manager that has distribution and they want to purchase an MGU, bring it in-house to save on costs. But the same thing can be done from a retail agency side. You go buy a large wholesale distributor as well. You bring underwriting in-house, you file for paper, and there you go.
Yeah, I could see that happening. So I'll give you my profound statement. I think there's room for a stop-loss product specific for GLP-1s. So you think about GLP-1s, it's not really a spec claim, but it's creating like ag claims, especially for like ag buyers. So, employers that are less than 1,000 lives are typically buying some form. And because we have so many captives that are in the space right now, because there's so many level funded products that are out there, that the GLP-1 issue is going to create a lot of strain in that space. And I think there's room for a specific GLP-1 product.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's it, guys. This was great. I really appreciate you guys coming out to do this episode with me. As I said, Firm and Final is moving to this format for next year, so we'll do more like group chat, and maybe we'll have you guys back to do another one of these.
Awesome. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mehb.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Thank you.